Have you ever looked up at the night sky and wondered if Mars once held water, if it once resembled our own world, then what happened? How does a planet capable of cradling life become nothing more than a cold, silent desert? And perhaps the quieter question: are we already walking that same path? The story of Mars does not begin in space. It begins on Earth. For thousands of years, long before telescopes, long before satellites, long before anyone had ever dreamed of leaving this world, human beings looked up at the night sky and noticed something unusual. Among the countless stars that dusted the darkness above them, one stood apart. It did not twinkle the way the others did. It did not stay still. It moved slowly, deliberately, as though it had somewhere to be. And it glowed a deep, quiet red. Not the cold white of distant suns, not the silver shimmer of the moon, but red, warm, almost alive. Ancient peoples watched it drift across the heavens and felt, in the way that only humans can, that it meant something. The Babylonians called it Nergal, a god of war and pestilence. The Greeks named it after Ares, the Romans after Mars. Always a god of conflict, always something powerful, something not quite safe to look at for too long. Perhaps they sensed something in it that we are only now beginning to understand. Centuries passed. Civilizations rose and fell beneath that slow red wanderer in the sky. And still, Mars moved, patient, indifferent, waiting. Then came the telescopes. In the 1800s, astronomers across Europe and America began turning their lenses toward Mars with a new kind of intensity. They could see more than ever before. Polar ice caps, dark patches that shifted with the seasons. The surface that seemed, in some ways, almost familiar. And then, in 1877, an Italian astronomer named Giovanni Schiaparelli peered through his telescope and saw something that would change everything. Lines. Long, thin, perfectly straight lines crossing the surface of Mars like the marks left by some careful, deliberate hand. He called them canali, which in Italian simply means channels, natural grooves in the landscape, like riverbeds or valleys. But when the word was translated into English, it became canals. And canals are not natural. Canals are built. The idea idea took hold the way the best ideas always do. Quietly at first, and then all at once. An American astronomer named Percival Lowell became utterly captivated. He built his own observatory in Arizona, high in the dry desert air where the skies were clear, and he spent years watching Mars, mapping it, imagining it. He saw the canals too, and he believed, truly, deeply believed, that they were an irrigation system, that some ancient civilization, watching their planet slowly dry out, had engineered a vast network of waterways to carry moisture from the polar ice caps down to the warmer regions near the equator. A dying world, trying to survive. A civilization doing what civilizations do. He published books. He gave lectures. He drew maps. And the world listened. For a moment, a long, shimmering, wonderful moment, humanity allowed itself to believe that we were not alone. That somewhere out there, across the cold, dark between worlds, someone else was looking up at their sky, and perhaps wondering the same things we wondered about ours. Of course, we now know that the canals were never real. They were an illusion, an artifact of the human eye and the imperfect telescopes of the time, finding patterns in randomness, the way we always do, the way we see faces in clouds or animals in constellations. We are pattern-seeking creatures. We cannot help ourselves. And yet, the question that Lowell's canals planted in the mind of our species never really went away. Is there life on Mars? Not just ancient myths now, not just a wandering red star, but a real question asked by scientists, philosophers, writers, dreamers. A question that would eventually lead us to actually go there. The 20th century arrived with new tools and new ambitions. We were no longer content to simply watch Mars from a distance. We wanted to reach it. The space race, that extraordinary, almost desperate sprint between nations in the 1950s and 60s, gave humanity something it had never quite had before: the technology to leave Earth entirely. And almost as soon as we could, we pointed ourselves at Mars. The first attempts were humbling. Rocket after rocket failed. Signals were lost. Spacecraft tumbled silently into the void, never to be heard from again. Mars, it seemed, did not welcome visitors easily. But we kept trying, because that is what we do. In 1965, a small American spacecraft called Mariner 4 became the first to successfully fly past Mars and send back images. The world waited. Scientists gathered around their screens, And when the pictures finally came through, Mars looked nothing like anyone had hoped. No canals, no cities, no signs of civilization, ancient or otherwise. What Mariner 4 revealed was a barren, cratered landscape, cold and still and empty. More like the moon than the living world people had imagined. The atmosphere was far thinner than expected. The surface temperature plunged to -80, -90 degrees at night. It was, by almost any measure, a dead world. And yet, even then, even in those first disappointing images, there were scientists who looked at Mars and thought, wait, this isn't the whole story. Because Mars was clearly a world that had changed, a world with a past, a world that had once been something else entirely. As more missions followed, more flybys, more orbiters, eventually landers, the picture became richer, more complicated, more interesting. Mars has the tallest volcano in the solar system. Olympus Mons rises nearly 3 times the height of Everest. Its base so wide that if you stood in the center, you would not be able to see the edges. They would be hidden beyond the curve of the horizon. Mars has a canyon system, Valles Marineris, that stretches nearly 5,000 kilometers across the planet's surface. If it were on Earth, it would span the entire width of the United States. It makes the Grand Canyon look like a scratch in the ground. And Mars has riverbeds, dry, ancient riverbeds, valleys carved by water that once flowed long ago in some warmer, wetter chapter of the planet's life. Water was here. That single thought changes everything. Because where there is water, there can be life. Or at least, there once could have been. Perhaps billions of years ago, when Mars was young and its atmosphere was thick enough to hold warmth, and liquid water ran across its surface in rivers and pooled in shallow seas, perhaps something lived there. Something small, something microscopic, some single-celled creature clinging to the edge of existence in the way that life always seems to find a way to do. We don't know. We genuinely do not know. And that uncertainty, that wide-open, humbling, breathtaking not knowing, is one of the most remarkable places that science has ever brought us to. In 1997, a small 6-wheeled rover named Sojourner trundled out onto the surface of Mars for the first time. It was not much bigger than a microwave oven. It moved at the speed of a cautious tortoise. But it moved. On Mars, under that pale pink sky, in that thin, cold air, across the rust-coloured rock and dust of another world entirely. People watched the images come back, grainy, slow, delayed by the enormous distance, and felt something that is difficult to put into words. Something like wonder. something like the feeling of being very small and finding in that smallness not fear, but awe. The rovers that followed were larger, more capable, more ambitious. Spirit and Opportunity, launched in 2003, were designed to last 90 days. Opportunity lasted nearly 15 years. It drove more than 45 kilometers across the Martian surface. It survived dust storms. It watched sunsets that no human eye had ever seen. It sent back photographs of its own shadow stretching long across the ancient ground. And then, in 2018, a global dust storm blanketed the planet. The solar panels could no longer charge. The rover fell silent. NASA engineers sent one final signal, a last attempt to make contact. No reply came. The message they sent, it was later reported, contained a recording. "I'll be seeing you."
I'll be seeing you in all the old familiar places that this heart of mine embraces all day through.
Today, a rover named Perseverance moves across a region called Jezero Crater, a place scientists believe was once a lake billions of years ago. It carries instruments capable of analyzing rock and soil at the chemical level. It is, in a very real sense, searching for fossils. Not bones, not footprints, but microscopic traces, chemical signatures, the quiet, invisible marks that life leaves behind in stone, if you know how to look. Alongside it, a small helicopter named Ingenuity made history in 2021 by becoming the first powered aircraft to fly on another planet. It was only supposed to fly 5 times. It flew over 70. And beyond the rovers, beyond the orbiters, beyond all the machines we have sent ahead of us, there are plans. Plans to send humans to Mars within our lifetimes. Perhaps within this decade, perhaps sooner than most people realize. A crewed spacecraft, a months-long journey through deep space, a landing on that rust-red surface. And then, footsteps. Human footsteps on Mars for the first time. The first person to stand on Mars is almost certainly alive right now. Perhaps they are a child somewhere, looking up at the night sky, noticing a particular red star that does not twinkle like the others. Perhaps they are already training. Perhaps they already know. But before all of that, before the missions and the rovers and the plans and the dreams, there was just this. A night sky. A red light moving slowly among the stars. And someone, thousands of years ago, on a hillside somewhere, wrapped in the dark, who looked up and wondered, what is that? Is anyone there? The questions we ask in the dark have a way of following us into the light. Mars is still out there tonight, If the sky is clear where you are, and you know where to look, you might be able to see it. Not twinkling, just glowing, steady and slow. Waiting the way it has always waited. Patient as stone, old as time. The first attempts failed. Many probes never reached Mars at all. Some simply lost contact, drifting silently into the dark. Others tore themselves apart in fire and silence. Mars does not welcome visitors easily. It sits there, rust-red and indifferent, as though it has all the time in the universe. And perhaps it does. But humanity, for all its smallness, is remarkably persistent. We tried again and again. Each failure answered with another launch window, another calculation, another hope folded carefully into a metal shell and thrown into the void. And then, the year was 1971. Quietly, without fanfare, as the most profound moments often arrive, a door opened. Mariner 9. For the first time in all of human history, a spacecraft settled into orbit around another world. Not a flyby, not a glimpse, an orbit, a vigil, a patient, circling gaze. We had, for the first time, become a neighbor to another planet. But what Mariner 9 saw was not what anyone expected. It saw dust. A storm, vast beyond imagination, had swallowed the entire planet. Not a local weather system, not a regional disturbance, the whole of Mars, wrapped in a shroud of rust-colored dust, swirling and impenetrable. Scientists waited. The spacecraft waited. And the storm, in its own time, began to settle. Slowly, like a curtain drawn back after a long sleep, the surface of Mars came into view. And what emerged was something no one had quite prepared themselves to see. There were mountains, not hills, not ridges, mountains of a scale that makes our own Everest seem like a gentle rise in the landscape. Olympus Mons, a volcano so vast, so impossibly broad, that if you stood upon its slopes, you would not know you were on a mountain at all. Its base stretches wider than the entire country of France. Its peak rises so high, it pierces the very top of the Martian atmosphere. It is the largest volcano in the known solar system. And it is silent now, perhaps dormant, perhaps merely patient. Then there were the canyons, Valles Marineris, named in quiet tribute for the very spacecraft that revealed it. A canyon system so immense that the Grand Canyon of Arizona, that magnificent wound in the American earth, would fit inside it like a small alcove. Valles Marineris stretches nearly the full width of the continental United States. In places, it plunges deeper than the height of Everest. Imagine standing at its rim in the thin Martian air, looking out across a chasm that seems to have no other side. No river carved this in a single season. Whatever made this took time, great geological time. And then, the most quietly astonishing discovery of all. Channels. Long, sinuous channels, tracing paths across the ancient Martian terrain like the dried memory of something that once flowed. They curved, they branched, they widened and narrowed. They looked, unmistakably, like the beds of rivers. Not rivers running now, not rivers frozen mid-motion, but the shapes of rivers, the grammar of rivers, the unmistakable signature of liquid water moving freely across a surface long, long ago. And that was the moment, that quiet, astonishing moment when everything shifted. Because until then, Mars had been a dead thing in the imagination of science. A barren rock, a cold, airless, featureless desert. Interesting for what it was not, more than for what it was. But these channels, these ghost rivers, whispered something different. They said there was once more here. Mars had a history, a deep, complex, layered history. A history of warmth, perhaps, of wetness, of conditions that on our own world gave rise to life. It was not just a dead stone floating in space. It was a world that had lived, or at least a world in which something like living had once been possible. That possibility changed everything. The missions that followed were no longer simply about geology or atmosphere or the mapping of craters. They became something older than science, something almost instinctive. A search. Because if Mars had once had water, real water, flowing water, ancient oceans perhaps, then the question that follows is one that human beings have been asking in one form or another since we first looked up at the stars. Are we alone? And now, for the first time, that question had somewhere specific to point itself. Not at the distant stars, not at abstract possibilities, but at the rust-red neighbour that hangs in our own night sky. Close enough, in cosmic terms, to almost touch. The hunt for water on Mars had begun, and with it, a quieter, more careful hope. That somewhere in the dry channels, the ancient lake beds, the buried ice and frozen regolith, something might still be waiting. Patient, as Mars has always been patient. Silent, as only a world without wind-carried sound can be silent. Waiting for us to ask the right question. Waiting for us to look in the right place. Waiting.